It's difficult to write sermons sometimes, especially whenever it's on something like the topic of murder. I know on a Sunday morning, whenever you want things to be nice and happy and positive, sometimes the Lord teaches us things that are not always happy and encouraging. But the joy of the writings of Jesus Christ is that whenever you dig deep, whenever you look into what he is saying, there is always hope, there is always encouragement, there is always something that can be learned to make our life better. And so as such, I'm glad that I'm able to speak with you all today on what Christ said on the Sermon on the Mount on murder. We are having a series that we're going through, as was mentioned in the prayer, where we are going through the Sermon on the Mount and taking lessons that Jesus gave. And so whenever thinking about murder and trying to think about how murder has impacted my life, I have to say that honestly, there's not been many instances of murder around me that I know of, but I know for sure one sticks out. 10 years ago when I was at Freed-Hardeman University, I had a girlfriend at the time whose sister was married to a preacher in Selmer, Tennessee. And I visited that church. That was whenever I met her parents for the first time. And within a short period of time after that had happened, the preacher there had been killed by his wife. And it was the Matthew Winkler case, which unfortunately made national news, and they've even made Lifetime movies about it. And Matthew's side was never told, but it was just shocking to me how close that was to home. They went to Freed-Hardeman. They were in the same social club that I was in before I was there. But it was more the fact that I knew somebody who knew the guy very, very well. And in fact, whenever I talked with other people from Freed-Hardeman, a lot of them knew those individuals very well. And I got to say that I'm glad that that's the only big instance that I can think of in my life where murder has been close to my life. There's one other. But we don't want murder anywhere near us. This is something, thankfully, that in a civilized society we don't have to deal with as frequently as people in other parts of the world might have to deal with. And so, as such, here I am speaking to a group of people that likely have never murdered and probably only know tangentially where murder has taken place in your life. However, whenever we look at the words of Jesus in this passage, we realize that murder is just the launching point for what Jesus is trying to say. If we need to say, don't murder anybody, well, there you go. That's the lesson, and we're done with it. But Jesus goes into things much more deeply, in a much more engaging way. We need to watch out not just for murder, but for the steps that lead to murder. I want us today to be able to look at the wisdom of Jesus Christ and see that not only should we avoid the steps to murder, but we should also be active peacemakers in everything that we do in this life. So let's first of all look at how we can stop the steps of murder. In this passage, Jesus begins a whole series in the Sermon on the Mount of statements where he says, "You have heard this, but I say to you." And he goes through and he reteaches incorrect understanding of the old law and makes it practical and makes it real that Christianity follows today. He said, "You have heard, don't murder, but I'm going to tell you that it's a lot bigger than that." He said, "I'm going to tell you, you've heard, don't commit adultery, but it goes a lot deeper than that." And he goes on and explains these methods here. And what is interesting about these statements is that he digs to the root of the sins and what is happening here. And what we learn is that God will judge us based on the steps leading to sin. God is going to judge us based on the steps leading to sin. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7. God is speaking to Samuel whenever Samuel is looking at different brothers of David to who is going to be the next king. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on his height or the height of his stature, because I've rejected him," talking about one of David's brothers here. "For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." The heart is where Jesus goes to on the Sermon on the Mount. And we need to make sure that our hearts are in the right place, and that is a lot more frequently something that we need to focus upon. And so we learn that murder first begins with anger. The origin of murder is going to be anger. Anger is its source. In Matthew chapter 5:22, he says, "I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable for the judgment." We need to understand here that not all anger is evil, but also that generally murder can't happen unless somebody is angry in the first place. On that first part, I mentioned the other murder that I know is, unfortunately, I didn't have him as a student very long, but one of my students I taught in Tennessee was murdered in Nashville when he was working as a pizza shop employee, and somebody came in and robbed the store and just killed him. And it was no rhyme or reason for why they did that. And even whenever you think about murder, at least I think of premeditated, seething anger that somebody has and vengeance against somebody. In this case, this man didn't even know Gordo. He had no idea who Gordo was. But clearly, that man had some sort of anger issues in the first place to even go to a place with a gun to be able to threaten violence on somebody and then to go through with it. There is something wrong with the heart of man if he is driven to the point where he shoots somebody for no reason at all. But even if somebody has reason, even if somebody is like, and by reason I mean they feel that they have reason, it is not an excuse to execute judgment upon somebody else with violence. So anger is what we need to watch out for. Anger is that first step towards murder. But not all of it is evil. We need to clarify things before we can see what kind of anger is wrong. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, it says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger." So clearly there is a type of anger which is okay in the sight of God, but then there's definitely a type of anger which is wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Well, we know that Jesus showed us righteous anger. Whenever we read in John chapter 12, verse 16, we read, John chapter 2, 14 through 16, we read that Jesus was witnessing people that were selling their goods inside the temple. I've heard one of my preaching friends who has spent time in Israel that he understands the sin in this issue, that they were selling the animals for the sacrifices in the temple, which was okay, but his understanding is that they were doing so in the court of the Gentiles. Basically, if you were a Gentile and you wanted to go worship to God, there was a place where you could go. And yet, nope, they turned it into a market because they didn't want Gentiles there. That's perhaps what happened. Either way, whenever Jesus saw this happen, Jesus was incensed that somebody had stopped the proper worship of God or turned the worship of God into a joke. And so Jesus made a whip and he chased them out. Whenever you think, what would Jesus do? Chasing people with a whip is evidently within the realm of possibility. But this is a righteous anger that Jesus had here. There was something that was wrong with man and their relationship with God, and Jesus did something about it. We read in Matthew chapter 23 that Jesus was angry. This is right at the end of his ministry, and he was calling out the scribes and the Pharisees for their hypocrisy. And you read through that, and the word anger comes to mind. He was very, very, very much angry. So there is an anger which is justified that we can have. But what is it? Well, if you happen to read through the New King James or the King James, the phrase in this sentence that's not in the other versions is angry without cause. which gives us a good idea into what the difference between good anger, righteous anger, and non-righteous anger is. Jesus is saying that we should not be angry without cause to other people. Righteous anger, if we want to know what righteous anger is something that is both against unrighteousness and it is properly controlled. This is the difference between righteous and unrighteous anger. Righteous anger is against unrighteousness and it is properly controlled. Now, both parts are essential to this. You can't have one and not the other. It is very right to have an anger against abortion and the killing of children that happens around the world. People that are angry about that, you're justified in that. But if your anger manifests itself in such a way that you go and bomb one of the clinics and kill people that are there, that is not just. That is wrong. And not saying of equal level, but likewise a sin that still separates from God. Whenever we are wounded for personal pride reasons, and yet we allow ourselves to seethe on that anger and against that person for a long period of time, likewise, Jesus is saying is wrong, is a sin, and you are liable for the judgment. We need to remember, though, that regardless of the reason, regardless of the source of the anger, wherever it comes from here, when properly controlled, anger is a gift from God. We get angry at personal things. That makes me think that part of that's probably natural. My child is 7 months, and he gets angry when he does not get what he wants. There was a video, I'm going to post it here eventually, but last night, he crawled. He definitely crawled because there was a pizza that we had, and Morgan slid it across the carpet, and he just booked it across the floor. And he was whining the whole time because he wanted that pizza. We are not giving our 7-month-old pizza. But he was angry because he wanted something. That's a natural thing that is given to us by God. However, how we use that anger, even if it comes from a selfish place, can be properly used. It can be put into a place where it is good. You see, whenever we have anger against unrighteousness, it can give us boldness in order to go and confront. To be able to just sit back and seethe in our anger instead of doing something about it, that's not right. Anger is a gift to be able to fix the problems that we see. We need to do it in the right way. But likewise, that personal anger can be used for self-improvement. Whenever we get angry at selfish things, we can stop and we can look at ourselves and ask, why am I angry? What can I do about this? And use that anger as a gasoline to fuel our change. Anger is a gift of God. And so Jesus is asking us here to examine our anger, to be able to look at it, evaluate its legitimacy, and then use it in a productive and right way. But we see also that murder begins with insults. Insults. Jesus goes on, he says, whoever insults his brother will be liable for the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable for the hell fire. The sin of insults come not in the words themselves, but in the heart behind the words. See, whenever we read in the Bible, you're going to see that there's some hefty insults that are brought around. I know in Psalm chapter 14, verse 1, the fool is said in their heart, there is no God. That's the same word that's used here. A person who says there is no God, according to the word of God, is a fool. That's harsh terminology. It's not one that I actively go around saying, but this is from God here. And even in Matthew chapter 23, verse 17, the passage where Jesus is calling out the scribes and the Pharisees for their falsehood, he says directly, you blind fools. That's harsh words. And so we got to wonder here, if Jesus is saying, if you say, you fool, you are liable to the judgment, but Jesus says, you blind fool, somewhere else, Either Jesus is a hypocrite here or there is something else entirely. And really what it's getting at here is the origin and the reasons behind the words in the first place. See, the inspired words that we read in the Bible, the insults, are a matter of the heart. God knows the heart. Jesus knows the heart of mankind and is able to tell. See, we need to take care of our words. You and I need to take care of our words because we do not know the heart and the intents of other people. And there are some cases where it's very clear, and I try to be non-judgmental whenever I hear people use words that I would not use. But at the same time, sometimes it might be appropriate. But in general, if we are people who frequently insult, we need to stop it. Generally, whenever the insults have come out of my mouth, I stop and I realize that they're over very petty and dumb and personal reasons. It's because I think that somebody did something that I disapprove of. That is not really a case to ever call somebody a fool. That is not ever a reason to call somebody stupid. And so we need to walk a very fine line in this case. And in general, stop insulting. Really is what it comes down to. We will be judged for our words, and so as such, we need to be very careful. In Matthew chapter 12, 36 and 37, Jesus says, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word that they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. The Lord does not want us to insult his creation. Let's watch our words. So we need to flee from ungodly anger. We need to run away from insults which demean the people of God. And instead we need to be active peacemakers. We need to try to make this world a better place by our actions. We need to make peace with our family and with our neighbors. And so we've got a religion of peace that we have to follow. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 15, see that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to everyone. Whenever somebody does evil to you, and they're going to do evil to you no matter what, he's saying do not respond with evil, but instead do good to them, not just the people of the church, but the people out in the world as well. We need to be active peacemakers. So we see, first of all, two examples that Jesus gives on how we are to be peacemakers. First of all, we need to make peace before worship. The next one will be making peace before judgment. But we need to make peace before worship. The passage here in 23 and 24, just for a reminder. If you are offering your gift at the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. You have to understand, back in that time period, if you're going to go leave your gift at the altar, that's in Jerusalem. Let's say you live somewhere far away. You are traveling a long distance. You're coming away from miles and miles away, and you go to leave your gift at the altar, and you realize, something's not right. It says to stop up and just leave it and go all the way back and fix it. Before church, you got to make things right. I know this seems a little bit strange. In this passage is a Star Warsism. And Star Wars, whenever people are trying to quote Star Wars, especially Empire Strikes Back, and they want to quote Darth Vader, they say, Luke, I am your father. But if you go back and watch the movie, like that quote is never there. It's not Luke, I am your father. Darth Vader says, no, I am your father. It's not there. People frequently mishear and misquote this passage. They think that it says, if you're going to the altar and you realize that you have something against somebody, you need to go back and fix it. It actually says, if somebody has something against you, which changes the dynamics of things greatly. It is not a matter of, I am seething in anger against somebody else and so I need to solve this. It is somebody else is angry at me for something that I have done. That is a different story. We need to be people that care enough about the emotions of our brothers and our sisters that we care about them and make things happen. We need to fix these problems. Principle number one of this passage: we need to make sure that other people are not hurt by our words and our actions. Principle number one: we need to make sure that other people are not hurt by our words and our actions. Now, this can be taken too far. There are some people that just are looking around to be argumentative about things. However, this is something that we can't escape from. Christians have to care about how we impact other people. I've heard people say, I'm not here to make friends. People going around and making comments like, it's not my fault if somebody else gets offended. Those are un-Christian statements. The Christian statements that we need to be making is other people's feelings based on my actions matter. What am I going to do about it? Now, this is not we're called to call for, well, there we go. Encourage one another as you are doing. So we're called to care for other people. And we need to do something about it here. Sorry, I got misplaced here. What are we going to do about this whenever we have hurt somebody? What are we going to do about it? We need to go and to talk with them. 1 Thessalonians 5:11, therefore encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing. But at the same time, over in Matthew chapter 18, verse 15, Jesus says that if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. In other words, if we find that somebody has something against us for something that we have done, we need to do something about it. Likewise, if we see that somebody has done something against us, we need to go and do something about it. No matter where the fault lies, if somebody is offended by something that we have done, or we think that somebody might be offended by something we have done, we need to go and make things right. We need to go and make things right. The second principle here, though, is that proper worship of God is dependent upon healthy relationships with other people. We have to have good relationships with other people in order to be right with God. This is not a get-out-of-church-free card. This doesn't mean, well, I can't go to church today because somebody's mad at me. That's not what that means at all. It means that if you're on the route to church and something happens and somebody is mad about something you've done, you need to fix it. That's the case. But don't try to make people mad on your way to church just to get out of church. That's not how it works. See, there is no such thing as a Christian who is faithful to God and is careless with their treatment of other people. There is no such thing as a faithful Christian who is faithful to God and does not care about their treatment of other people. We see this in Micah chapter 6, 7, and 8, where God spoke through the prophet Micah. Will the Lord be blessed with the thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you is to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. God is saying all of the sacrifices in the world, all of the religious attendance that you have, you can be in here day and night at church, and none of that will matter one iota if we do not care for people around us and to make sure that they are right with us. But we need to make peace before judgment. We need to make peace before judgment. This is good wisdom for earthly judgments, that if you are in a court situation and you owe somebody something for something that you've done, try to solve it before you go to the court and the court does something about it. That's good practical advice. Fix problems while you can. But really, this matters most with the spiritual judgment that is to come. There is a spiritual judgment that we have coming that we need to make sure that we are prepared for. And we need to fix things while we can. We have breath in our lungs today. Today is a day to fix things. If there is any guilt or reasonably perceived guilt in what we have done to others, the question is are you willing, am I willing to try to make things right? Are we willing to make things right? All in all, we are called to be at peace with others in all that we do, to make this our active goal in life. Wherever the insult lies, wherever the source lies, try to make things right. Romans chapter 12, verses 16 through 18. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. And if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. God has called us to be peaceful people. Maybe today, as the sermon has gone on, you have thought about your relationships with other people. All of us have somebody who we have offended, and we have been offended by somebody else. Maybe you have anger in your heart that you need help with. You need to be able to use that anger in a good and positive way. The church wants to pray with you. I know the elders are going to be in the back, and they would love to chat with you and help you to be able to control your God-given gift in a way that helps you be right with God. Maybe you have any other problem. That's okay. They're there to be able to chat with you. But maybe you are not in a right relationship with God at all. You've not started that path with Him. You are not yet a Christian. We read in the Bible how that can be changed. That if you believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God, you are willing to change your life and to dedicate yourself to Him, turning away from sin. You can confess that you believe that Jesus is the Christ, and you can be baptized in the waters we have prepared right over here, and you can be washed of your sins. If we can help you in any way, we ask that you please